So someone once told me it's not a YouTube woodworking channel until you've done an in-grain cutting board. So I figured Christmas time was a perfect opportunity to go ahead and knock out a couple. This one here is for my grandmother, and initially it was going to be a brick pattern, but I screwed up the mortar joints along the long way, and I conveniently deleted all that footage, so this video will just look like I knew what I was doing. So I've cut all these boards to their rough dimension and jointed a couple of faces to get a good clean cut on the table saw, and now I'm cutting all these to 2 inches in width, and they're approximately 1 inch thick. So this will give me a 2-to-1 ratio on my bricks. For the maple bits of this, I had some scraps, and I just planed them down to 1/8 of an inch, which is the minimum thickness that my planer will allow me to joint. So it worked out. Then once I have everything glued up, or everything milled down to its proper dimensions, I'm going to go ahead and start gluing this all together. And you just alternate walnut for maple, and you want to ensure that your grain directions all go in the same way. This is how I messed up the longer mortar joints in this design. But here I'm using the glue spreader to make my job easier. I want to get this actually glued and clamped together pretty quickly. And I have one piece that's 1 inch by the same thickness as everything else, and that's what's going to give us our running bond pattern. I've got a caul in the center, and I'm taking a piece of scrap maple, a cutoff, and making sure that all those are seated nicely against the ground, or against the tabletop. That way I have one really nice flat surface. That way I don't have to plane as much off to get it all nice and level. And when you think you got enough clamps, add 1 or 2 more. Or 3. And I let this sit overnight, and now I'm taking off all the clamps. I'm going to clean off that wax paper as best I can. So after I get everything cleaned up, I'm going to square off one edge on the MFT table there using the vegetable track saw. Then I'm going to set my proper depth. By proper depth, I mean how tall do you want the cutting board to be, plus whatever you're going to sand off. I'm going to cut a whole bunch of strips right about the time that my camera battery dies and you miss everything. So sorry about that, but what you can see here is the strips that I end up with, and I run them through the planer, very light passes, all on the finish side first, or the flattest side that I have. Then I'm going to turn them back over and start planing them down to where the walnut and the maple are flush with each other. If you look right now, you can see a small gap where the maple is not quite as thick as the walnut pieces. Now that we have everything nice and true, squared, and planed to the same thickness, we can start to put together our in-grain cutting board pattern by flipping every other board. And that's going to give us our running bond pattern, because we had that one piece that was half the width as all the other pieces. And what I'm doing is all of these have a slight kind of cupping, and I did have some planer snipe as well. So I'm playing with the orientation of all of these to make sure that I have the best possible yield out of this board given my limitations. Now you can see there are all of the boards that I had cut to be the long line mortar and I realized that I cut them the same way as I did these pieces, which meant that if I had used them, it would have been an in-grain glue joint, which would have made the cutting board weaker overall. As it was, I liked the pattern actually without the quote-unquote long mortar joints, so I went ahead and went with it as it was. I also have a couple of sacrificial pieces of maple that are the same thickness as the cutting board itself to act as sacrificial pieces, which should have been on the other ends of this board instead of where I had them to protect for chip out, but because of the earlier mentioned planer snipe, it actually worked out because I cut off everywhere there would have been any chip out due to the in-grain going through the planer. You do have to be careful putting in-grain cutting boards through the planer. Make sure you take very light passes. Make sure you're not standing behind the planer as you're putting the piece in. Put it in and step to the side. Also, make sure that your planer has anti-kickback fingers for the best safety, and ultimately, like anything else in woodworking, it is left to your discretion. You know, do what you feel safe. If there's anything that anyone tells you to do that you don't feel comfortable doing, don't do it. Here I am gluing this up again, and you know, keep in mind the end grain is now facing up. This is the best way to make a cutting board because it's much less likely to show wear as people are cutting. So now I'm just planing this through, taking very light passes. If I were to try to take too hard of a pass, I would be overstressing my motor on my planer because this is almost full width capacity for my planer. It also would cause really bad chip out on the final end, and you can see there with the chips that are coming off that even with very light passes, I'm getting a lot of chip out. Again, I just cut it off at the end, so it wasn't something that ended up being detrimental to the project. But if I was trying to save every last scrap, it would be a consideration. Now I'm cutting off my sacrificial boards. And I opted to use the table saw for the last pass there because the board, due to the clamping and some of that snipe, wasn't perfectly true. So I wanted to be able to sneak up on that where I was able to just get rid of that last hair of maple. Now I'm going to put a couple of handholds in just to make this easier to get off the countertop once you're done with it. And I raised the bit just slightly to run over the bit again, and this helps remove a good majority of the burn that the router bit's going to introduce. Now for a ton of sanding. The planer saves a lot of this effort, but it's still just a ton of sanding. There's no way to get around it that I'm aware of unless you're willing to invest in a drum sander. I like to hand round over the edges. It knocks the sharpness off, but it still keeps a nice crisp line. Now with all the sanding out of the way, it's time to go ahead and put my mark on this piece. So I'm trying to find rough center. I keep refining this branding process, and this seems to work really well, although I am a bit uncomfortable with the torch having a round base, being able to potentially roll off. So this will probably be the process that I start to refine. And branding, like anything else, is a skill. So I'm feeling like I'm doing a better job than when I first got this brand, and I'm starting to get really happy with the way this looks and my ability to time it properly. And you can tell this wood is very thirsty. It's soaking in a lot of mineral oil, which is basically what I'm using for the finish. And then I'm going to finish it with some beeswax, and that'll be the final food safe finish. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe for more videos.